We're recording, so that means your phone's zipped up all the way. It can be zipped in a pocket, even though that's not really what I'm looking for, but take it off the table, so out of sight completely. Please, thank you. We'll not talk all that. Okay. All right, so okay. Focus on the screen. You guys are facing the wrong way. All right, so there is an aspect of adding grain, adding texture that I've kind of briefly touched on, mentioned here and there, but we haven't really got into why you would even do it in the first place. Let me turn on my microphone so you guys can actually hear me. Before we get into that, one last reminder, we are here for Flex today. I don't know where the citizenship is, but hopefully it comes. Excuse me, before we get started. All right, texture. So before we get into how to set up our Illustrator to make the texture happen in the way that I'm intending. Let me reply to that real quick. There is a, oh, I gotta grab that from first period. Let me get that real quick. I forgot this. Or did we go over this already? Let's see. Okay, that might have been on Monday. Did we already talk about why you should add texture to your projects? Yeah. Okay, cool. So then today we're just going to do setup. It's going to look something like this. This is the first period reference with a lot more tools set up in a specific order on the side here. And it's all going to be referencing this video. So if you find my way of talking about it confusing, or if I go too fast, I totally understand. Don't worry. I'm following the steps in this video, and you can see the effect that we're going for with the super clean digital design here. And the lot more tactile, a lot more feelable, a lot more realistic, so to speak, version here. Okay, so in order to do this, you got to have Illustrator open. You can follow along with me or do this on your own time. I don't mind either way. But this is how I find the best way to kind of get all these pieces in order. So I'm just going to open up a new file by default. You can do this on your version of 6.3 as it is so far. It does not matter too much because, let me reset Essentials Classic. There we go. It should be looking something like this by default, right? So we need to pop out using the window menu about 5 different little tools that we're going to arrange in such a way that make the process of adding grain a little bit easier. The process of adding grain using the grain effect is kind of something that repeats itself and is a little bit different than some of the things we've covered so far. So just be patient with this process, and this setup helps because it gets everything all in one spot for you. The first thing that you should do, I'm going to disconnect my tools so you can see me click on them a little bit better. You don't have to do that. But all over Illustrator, all over the Adobe products are these little sets of 2 triangles that are facing certain directions. If you click on those triangles, they will either expand a menu or collapse a menu. It's going to make it smaller or larger. You can make your toolbar taller and skinnier or a little bit wider. I prefer this one so you can see the whole thing, but you guys are doing what's most comfortable for you. The first thing you do want to do though is click on these 2 triangles to make your properties panel collapse. And you probably already got some setup that works for you. I'm using Essentials Classic by default, just so you guys have a reference. You want to collapse that properties panel because we're going to add some more cool stuff on the side here. Once you've collapsed your properties panel, you go to Window, and then you're going to open up the Appearance window is our first one. If you go Window and then you click on a tool, it might pop it out as a result of it being like built into the side or included in one of the defaults. We want these tabs as separate windows. So the same way that you resize or you move around tabs in your browser, you're going to do the same thing for the Appearance tab like this. You can click and drag it. You're just going to place it in the artboard somewhere so that it's loose like this one is. We're going to do that same thing in the alphabetical direction. We're going to also pull up Color, which is connected. It's the paint palette icon. Click and drag that Color tab off to the side so that it's a separate window. After Color, we need Gradients. Gradient is also one that's default in Essentials Classic, but we want it separated, so we're going to move that tab. Hi, welcome in. Going to move that tab off to the side. Mine's a little bit larger than the default, so let's make it, it doesn't want to shrink. That is fine. We need 2 more. What were the other 2? We need Layers. It helps to have layers in its own panel. It's especially important for because we're beginning to work with something called masks today, which we'll go into more detail on Photoshop. But having the layers visible makes this whole process a little bit easier. Finally, the last thing you need to open up is transparency, which if I remember where T is in the alphabet, it is right down here. There's transparency right underneath transform. Click and drag that transparency tab out. And these are the 5 windows that we're going to be resizing, giving them a little bit more space so that they stay open. Technically, you could just leave them loose like this. It helps if you have the 2 monitors, but none of y'all do. So if you're doing this at home with 2 monitors, you can move these off screen and position them however you like. For our purposes, we're going to start arranging these in such a way that makes them all visible on the side, like the properties panel would look like this. In Illustrator, or in a majority of the Adobe programs that work with like still images, so like Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator, the ones that don't typically move, if you click and drag a tab, make sure you're grabbing on the name of the tab, not so much on the top of the window, but the name of the tab. If you click and drag that to different parts of the screen, like over where the rest of these tools live, you'll see these blue bars appear. If it's a blue box, that means you're going to be putting it in the kind of group that it is here. We don't want to do that. If it's a blue line, it's going to make a whole new like column of tools. We don't want to do that either. We want this like really large, you see how it has a little animation. It has the blue line and then like a faded sort of thing going on. In that way, you want that one because that is going to not only add it to a new column, but expand it into having some more room to work here. The first one you want to do is appearance. We're going to go in alphabetical order. After appearance, you want to take color, grabbing it by the name, and instead of putting it on the side, we're going to try to put it underneath here so that it uses some of this available space on our bottom side like this. Sometimes it doesn't work. I don't know why some of them do and some of them don't. So we'll try color here again in a second. I think gradient is one that you can put. Nope. Okay, let's try transparency. Let me do the thing that I need to do. Bless you. Okay, let me do some stuff real quick. You can also put them into tabs. So now appearance and color are both taking up large portions of this column that we've built here. There's a way to divide these in such a way that it like takes up not this much space. Okay, let's try doing this. And let's take this window, see if that does it. No, okay, fine. You do want layers to be on its own column though. It makes it really easy to see what we're trying to do here. Transparency is one that would let me, come on. Sometimes, like if you look at first period's example, which is where, hold on. This one? Yeah. That works. Okay, cool. So let's try stacking them all at the top. Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, so we're going to go in a different order. Appearance, layers should have its own sort of space. We can mix layers and transparency together because transparency is a pretty small window, but we want appearance, color, and gradient to occupy another column so that it's looking something like this. It can be in any order that you want, but as long as you have these 5 windows kind of like stuck together in a way, arranged in such a fashion that like they are all visible, it is an important part of this grain making process. And doing this setup now makes the process of adding the texture a lot easier. Does this make sense? Kind of tedious, I know, I apologize. But it is a useful sort of way to understand how aspects of Illustrator works. So to actually apply the grain effect, we need something in our scene to apply the grain effect to. So if you're doing something like a hill scene, let's just pretend that, actually that is trash. Let me do a good one. Like a hill, got a little valley in it. Maybe there's another little hill. Who knows, right? And then I'll turn this into a polygon. Can hold shift. That's a little bit over. This is now a closed shape, right? It's got a fill. It's filling like you would expect it to because I connected the front part back to the back part. Let's make this a little bit greener, a little bit grassier, something like this. Okay. I'm personally going to take the stroke off of it because I prefer having just the single color. You know, we can resize this, whatever. Let's pretend this is my project, my progress on 6.3 so far. So in order for this effect to happen, actually watch this. So if you look at the transparency model or the little transparency node on my screen, watch what happens when I click on a shape or a path of some kind. When I click on the shape, you see this make mask button appear and a little thumbnail, a little preview, as well as a square of the same size with an X on it. Masks are all about transparency and revealing or concealing different parts of an image or changing the way that they appear in a variety of ways. It's not like a Halloween mask so much as it's like a sheet of paper that you're laying over another sheet of paper, and you make changes to the top sheet of paper which reflect the bottom. And it'll make sense more in Photoshop as well as here in a second. But as far as what you actually do, once you have a shape selected, the next step is to click the Make Mask button. And it's going to do this. Actually, hold on, I skipped a step. What you're going to do is make an exact copy of the shape that you're trying to create. This is our cutout, our sheet of paper that we're making the effect on. You hold Control-C, obviously, to copy it. But instead of pressing Control-V, which is going to offset it, you're going to press Control-F. When I press Control-F, it doesn't look like anything happens. But the reason I had you make the layers panel bigger is because there are two clones of the shape exactly right on top of one another. Control-V pastes, but Control-F pastes in place. So it's going to stick it right on top of the other one. And that's important for what we're trying to do here. What we're also trying to do here is experiment with some ways to create the illusion of light and depth. And in order to do that, we need one shape to be darker or lighter than another shape. I personally prefer making one shape darker because I like setting my color one time and then kind of working backwards. So I'm going to click on this one, go to my fill, and I'm just going to bring that green a little bit further down. Alternatively, you can click on the color panel, click on these three lines, and click the Show Options button. And what that will do, you guys are probably set to either RGB or CMYK. If you click on that same, it's called a hamburger icon. I don't love that word, but the little menu icon, and set it to HSB, which stands for Hue, Saturation, and Brightness. That gives you the B value, which you can adjust how percentage bright the color is. I want it lower, so I'm going to set it to about 45%. So if we look here, I have a, well, that's not right. My darker one is on top. I actually want the darker one to be on the bottom. So I'm going to click and drag this under here so that on top we have the light one. If I turn the eyeball on and off, you can see there's the lighter version. And on the bottom, let me turn that on the bottom, we have the darker version. So by selecting this top one, because remember all the layers happen in a stack, the bottom one is first, following all the way up to the top one, which is last. We're going to click on this path in our layers, and then click on the path in the artboard, and then finally click the Make Mask button. And it's going to look like nothing happens, except for the screen turning black and the lighter hill shape turning invisible. We're also going to check this invert mask button. What we've done here is created a mask on top of our original artwork in the shape of our original artwork. And what this has allowed us to do is enter something that I've called the mask dimension. By switching, look at my layers panel, when I switch between these two windows, you see how when I click on this one, it shows both layers. One of them says path, the other says path, and it's all white. But if I click on the black square, that enters something called an opacity mask. That is what we've just created. We've made an exact paper cutout in this hill shape in our artboard here. The next step in actually making the grain process happen is to do that Control-C, Control-F again to paste the opacity mask, because we're in the mask dimension. This is why you want to make sure that yours says opacity mask before you do any more effect generation. We want to stay in the mask dimension. If you do it here, nothing will happen. If it says layer 1, it's not going to do the effect that you intend. It's got to say opacity mask. Okay, so we're going to click on the opacity mask and hold Control-C and then Control-F, and it's going to bring that green back in. You can see that it's returned, and inside of here we have our opacity mask path. If I were to move this around, it's turned into like this ghost of an image of sorts. It's funky. Just bear with me for a second here. In the mask dimension, we've now created a copy of that mask, which is where we're going to apply the texture. This is why we had the gradient panel come up as well as the appearance panel, because we're going to take this mask and set it to have a fill of a gradient instead of the color that we initially planned. And to do that, you go down to your appearance panel, wherever that is, you click on the box that says fill. It's going to kind of get bigger like this. It's going to have a little arrow drop down. And then you just want to move up and click anywhere inside of this gradient slider. When I do that, you can see it very subtly on the projector, but it's a lot, not a lot, but it's more obvious on the Zoom room. It's applied a gradient of that color in a way across the top of this mask. So in the mask dimension, you can see it's got this white to black relationship now, whereas the regular dimension has just the green that we initially started with. Hi. This is now if you want to adjust how your gradient happens, you can press the G key and you can move the stops around. You can make it a different relationship from light to dark. You can pull the dark side over to this side, make it a much shorter distance. You can see it better in the Zoom room than on the projector. You can also drag a new gradient. You can press G and then just drag a new one. You can change okay, there we go. You can change the angle of the gradient. You can see it very subtly on the projector. But anyway, I'm going to kind of do one of these. Actually, I'm going to go from the bottom, no, top to bottom, because we want the lighter part to be, just kidding. We do want the lighter part on the bottom. It's confusing and backwards, but this is the steps that you should take to make this grain effect happen. Once you've got your gradient in a way that you're happy with, if you click back on your selection tool, you'll notice we're still in the mask dimension and it looks a little bit different. It's not exactly filling out the way that it initially had. That is okay. The final step that you do to add the texture effect. What we're doing is a long way of doing something called non-destructive editing. We'll get more into that in Photoshop, but it's a way to keep your original design safe and basically build a filter instead of editing the raw data underneath. What we do, the final step in this arduous process, this many clicks, many new stuff, is you go to Effect, and then Texture, and then Grain, and that's gonna pop up. Oops, I had the wrong thing selected. Let me try this again. Okay. Make sure we're still in the opacity mask dimension. It was doing this to first period too. Give me the grain. That's what we're looking for. So when you go texture effect, or when you go effect texture grain, it's going to pop open the second window, which you can adjust the intensity of the grain if you want it to be more or less intense. Whether that more intensity means more of the color on the top of your gradient, whereas less intense means the opposite, more intensity on the other side. You want to change your grain type. You can experiment with a couple different ones. I find stippled works the best for this printed paper, sort of like textured paper kind of effect that you're going for. I find stippled looks the coolest, makes it the grainiest. You can adjust this however you like it to look. Low contrast is more distance between the grains and the colors, whereas high contrast is a pretty hard edge. And you can just adjust this this kind of filter that we've created as you see fit. So I'm going to go higher intensity, lower contrast, stippled. When I click OK, it's very, very subtle. But if you look at the effect on the hills, they're a lot more visually interesting. It's drawing your eye in more because we've added the effect to our filter in the mask dimension. That if we switch back to the regular dimension, get out of our opacity mask, it should, that's what it looks like. It's supposed to move both of them at the same time. I don't know why it did that. If I highlight both of these, now we have a filter over top. You can see how it responds depending on how we resize our hill shape. You can take your gradient tool and, oops, wait, hold on. Once you group it together, it does get a little kind of funky. If you're trying to edit the mask, you got to click on the top of the shape and make sure you see the grain appear in the transparency window. That'll let you go back into the mask dimension where you can adjust some of the color. You can adjust the hue if you wanted to go a totally different color on the gradient. Press G, change these colors, same way we did it on the other gradient tool. Not really much is happening. But this is a summary of this video in your thread. If I could keep losing it. Sorry. One sec. I know I have a tab open. Where is it? Okay, but we're coming to the end of my my demo here. If you feel stuck still, if it's not working the way you want it to, don't fret because we have work time today. It's following this video. If this video makes a little bit more sense to you, that's totally fine. I understand. He goes into more detail about some of the other types of gradients you can apply or how you can mess with this effect a little more. More research if it's something you're interested in. There's also Mr. Hendrix's tutorial, which is a little bit longer, walking you through a lot of the ways to add some of this texture to the foliage that you need, some of the hills that you need. So those videos are available for you to access. I know this is confusing. Be patient with yourself. It's a very useful tool that we're going to experiment with more in the future. But this is the one that I'm using most consistently, is the grain effect to give my digital designs a little bit more texture, a little bit more fun in the visual. So keep your questions for the work time because they're going to depend on different designs. But this is what I have for y'all today. Let me process this, and the rest of this time is yours. We're off the air. You can bring your phones back out. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Be patient with yourself.